A community is in mourning after 12 people were killed in Israel's military operation in Palestinian occupied territory last week. Thousands filled the streets of Jenin to bury those who were killed. The Israeli military says all 12 killed were combatants and that their military was dismantling a terrorist network. The operation destroyed homes, left many people without running water and electricity. Joining me now to discuss this is Noura Erakat, a professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She's also the author of the book Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Help us understand what exactly is happening in Jenin right now.
So, Mark, what you described was a specific incident that limits our analysis to what happened over the course of 48 hours when Israel launched an aerial and ground invasion of a half square kilometer home to 11 to 14,000 Palestinian refugees, attacked them with aerial gunships, with drones, with cruise missiles, and then demolished infrastructure throughout the camp using bulldozers. This is a refugee population that is under Israeli military occupation, that is subject to a settler colonial regime and to Israeli apartheid. What we are not told, right, is how Israel has no right to be in those Palestinian territories at all, and certainly doesn't have a right to self-defense against a population to whom it owes a duty to protect. Those powers, the policing powers, Palestinians upon its occupation in 1967, and has only a duty to protect until it reverts sovereignty to those people. But Israel both denies that Palestinians exist, and therefore there is no sovereign, and insists that these lands belong to them. And so what they tell the world is that they are dismantling a terrorist unit. But what people don't understand is that this is a defenseless population who has been systematically subjected to Israeli violence, that has been abandoned by an international community. And to the extent that they're defending themselves, they have every right to do so legally.
So people who are watching this on the international news, because the domestic news here in the United States is very rarely covering this story, certainly not the way we cover other stories, like Ukraine, like France, like, Kosovo in the past. How do we explain to people why this is not an act of Israeli self-defense? Because the news is saying Israelis are fighting back because of this terrorist network. Who are these supposed terrorists, and why is that not a legitimate argument in your estimation?
Because of the elision of context of the situation, people don't understand that Israel is a settler colonial power that is intent on removing Palestinians in order to take their land, to concentrate them into smaller and smaller reservations, or what would be akin to apartheid Bantustans, and to declare sovereignty over it. Palestinians are a people who are occupied and subject to an apartheid regime since Israel's establishment in 1948. The normalization of Israel's establishment, as well as the normalization of its occupation, and now the normalization of apartheid, make it possible for people to understand that Israel has no right to self-defense against a population that it has a duty to protect. This was affirmed in 2004 by the International Court of Justice, which says that Israel has a right to defend itself within its borders, but cannot do so in Palestinian territory. So another way to think about this, Israel is attempting to steal Palestinian lands. And as Palestinians are resisting that theft and the removal, Israel is pummeling them with advanced weapons technologies and crying self-defense. Israel is the only nuclear power in the Middle East. The Palestinians are a stateless, defenseless population who do not even have their own airport. The Palestinian president needs approval from Israel in order to travel. So can you imagine what life is like for Palestinian refugees who don't even have that access? This attack on Jenin follows a series of what has been described as settler programs. These are armed Israeli settlers, meaning they are there to settle the land and terrorize the population. They attack the Palestinians so in Hawara, in Turmusaya, and in Jenin, and they do so with the cover of an Israeli military. Palestinians must defend themselves against these attacks, and yet they do not have an army. They do not have an international unit to protect them. And even when they try to protect themselves, Israel describes them as terrorists and uses disproportionate and indiscriminate force against Palestinians who are trapped in tight, urban, dense areas and attacked with aerial gunships and missiles. This is as bad as you can imagine. And the only thing that's worse than it is that they are blamed for their own death.
It's an important point you make here, because I think some people may have initially heard you as saying, like, Israelis don't have a right to self-defense. But it seems to me what's really happening here is that this is important to remind the audience that this isn't self-defense, that the interaction or our analysis can't start with Palestinian resistance, and then which we then would see as violence, and then see the Israeli response as self-defense, but rather we see the occupation of Palestinian land, the attempted theft of Palestinian land, as the initial act of violence. Palestinians are resisting that, and then Israel is writing that off and then acting as if what they're doing is self-defense, when in fact they are the aggressor in this case, based on international law. That's an analysis that we don't get normally. That's an analysis that we have to have. That's a conversation we have to continue to have in the public sphere so that everyone understands what's going on in this region. And as we aim to show solidarity with oppressed people all over the globe, this has to be part of that conversation. Noura Erakat, I want to thank you for joining the conversation. I want to thank you for breaking that down for us. We'll be sure to have you back very, very soon. Everybody, make sure you check out Noura Erakat's book. It's called Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine. You can get it anywhere books are sold, but of course, we always encourage you to head to your local Black-owned bookstore to make it happen.